Hello and welcome back to JVCTR. For those that are new, my name is Johnny and today we've got something a little bit different. As you can see, we have a racing Citroen C1.
But if I wait till the summer,
Now, recently I have had a few requests from some of you guys saying that you'd like to see me doing some other cars and something that's a bit different. And when I was offered by SEC to come down and have a look at this thing, I mean, I couldn't really turn the opportunity down. Now, this video comes from what we're doing this weekend actually, although by the time this is uploaded, it will be in the past for you guys. But anyway, this weekend I'm going to Silverstone and we're going to be racing this Citroen C1 for a total of 24 hours, non-stop endurance racing. And it should be quite good fun. Sorry about the sirens. But before we did that, I wanted to sort of take you through the car, what's been done to it, what you need to do for the race, and that kind of stuff. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, before we get into the specifics about this car, I'm sure you're asking yourself, like, why does this even exist? I mean, you could not get a slower car to start with, but there is actually quite a cool reasoning behind it. Now, as some of you may or may not know, Citroen 2CV racing was incredibly popular and still is, to be fair. But the reason that it was initially so popular is because it was so cheap. Like, Citroen 2CVs were really cheap to buy, to repair, and the tyres and brakes and everything. It was all just so cheap, and it was probably the cheapest way of getting into motor racing. But the problem with Citroen 2CVs is that they're now becoming sort of like almost an appreciating classic, which means if you're going to race them and, you know, give them a hard time, actually spares are becoming more and more expensive. And that's where this comes in. So this kind of has some form of similar characteristics to the Citroen 2CV. First of all, it's a Citroen. It also has very little power, and it's generally just quite a giggle to drive, really. But I guess the biggest appeal of this is price. So you can pick up one of these as cheap as £600–700 for a donor car. The C1 Racing sort of team, if you like, I recommend you get a car that's got around about 80,000 miles on it or less, just for mechanical reasons. And the kit that you need to buy in order to make it safe to race and basically conform with all the regulations of this particular challenge that we're going to do is about £1,600. Which means actually you can go racing for around about £3,000 and you can do a full season of racing for around about £12,000. So that's the appeal of this thing, and this is why it is here. So let's talk through what you actually need to do to get it ready to race. So first up is, of course, safety features. So you've got exterior, like shut-off valves up here, you've got some bonnet clutches, you've got some club supplied fog lights, you've got tow straps. I mean, this is all pretty standard stuff when it comes to the racing car stuff. If we go inside, as I'm sure you can see, the most obvious change in here is the bright yellow roll cage. Now, this is a club supplied cage, fully bolt-in. You can do it in your garage. You need harnesses, a seat that's sort of supportive and racy, should we say? Basically one that's suitable for harnesses. It's not going to crush you in a crash. And otherwise, it's basically just stripped out in here. There's nothing else that you actually need to do. This particular car's got a nicer steering wheel, but I don't believe you actually need to replace that. Yeah, all of this stuff you can just do in your garage, and I think that's the beauty of racing these things. One other thing, just as we're inside the car, is that you must have a working radio. Now, that is there purely to prove that you're using the standard wiring loom, because of course you're not allowed to change any of the ECU or any of that kind of stuff. It must be running standard power, and this is quite an easy way for the marshals to tell that you're using the standard wiring loom. Now, let's get out on the road when I can talk to you a little bit more about the mechanical modifications to this car and how it drives and that kind of stuff. But just as we're here, if any of you are thinking about getting a 6-point harness for the road, this is pretty much why you shouldn't, as obviously I need to get everything in order. So bear with me, I'm just going to put my seatbelt on. That's one. One. And then 2. Shoulder strap. 3. 4. Not nearly. 4. Right, that's it. My seatbelt is on. We're ready to go. Okay, so as you can hear, it's pretty noisy in here. There's a particular squeak right at the back, which you can probably pick up on the microphone. In terms of reviewing this car, it's actually been quite tough for me because I'm so used to reviewing road cars and just seeing how good they are on the road, that actually reviewing a race car on a road where it's not really designed to be is going to be a little bit challenging. So I apologise if I do end up reviewing this a little bit like a road car, but yeah, as you can hear, stripping out an interior of any car makes it really noisy. Now the engine, it's pretty revvy, but oh my god, it's slow. I mean, it's slower than I thought it was going to be. In terms of the chassis, it handles the road quite well, and if it's going to do anything, it will probably oversteer before it understeers, much like my Fiesta actually. And if you really chuck it into a corner, you start to understand the appeal of racing these things. Like, no, it's not fast. I mean, in fact, I'm doing 50 mile an hour and it feels about 100 mile an hour. But it's quite good fun. I mean, the tyres on this thing are Nankang AS ones, and they have to be shaved, so they're club supplied, specific for racing these cars. And I wouldn't say they're the grippiest of tyres, but it certainly makes for a bit of a giggle. The car slides around quite nicely, but also quite predictably, which is refreshing, I must admit. Unfortunately, we do have a cyclist in front of me who has ruined all my fun. So I'll come back to you once I've got past the cyclist. Anyway, as I was saying, in terms of brakes, they're actually pretty good. I mean, because this car is so light, around about the 900 kilo mark, the brakes, I mean, they've got racing pads in, but otherwise they haven't been changed at all, really. They're okay. Talking of weight, actually, as I said, this car is around about 900 kilos with sort of fluids and all that kind of stuff. But the one thing I would say is that the minimum weight for racing these is actually, sorry, it's a bit of a bumpy road here, is actually 950 kilos. So there is actually ballast in this car to bring it up to the minimum level. And that's the same for nearly all of them. They have to have ballast to make them heavier, to make them the same, if that makes sense. Which is kind of what I like about the series of this. Like, yes, the cars are a bit slow, but the way it's all been put together is all very, very fair, and I quite like that. Gearbox, it's there. Obviously, it's the standard one. It's yeah, it's not that good, if I'm honest. It's not good at all. But you know, you can change gears with it, and yeah, it does gearboxy things. In the corners is where this thing really comes alive. I mean, you can hear how long it takes to get up any speed, but through the corners especially, it's absolutely wicked fun. Oh, hill and toe. Oh, you can hill and toe. That's pretty good. I totally get why racing one of these is fun. It's a cool car. It's pretty cool. One thing I will say is that I have been quite vague to this point about the mechanics of this car, and there's a reason for that, and that is because I would quite like to go back to SCC, put the car on a ramp and actually show you the suspension components, because I think that's probably an easier way for you to understand what you actually have to do and understand what goes into it. And if you're thinking about making one of these cars, for example, actually how simple it is, because there isn't actually that much you need to do. So without further ado, let's get back to the garage and show you what's underneath. So here we are, we've got the mighty C1 up on the ramps, and as you can see, underneath it doesn't look too different apart from the rather obvious Bilstein suspension. So in order to compete, you just need the springs that are at the top, so that drops the car by around about 30 mils. They have the option of upgrading to the dampers, which you can see here. They're probably the most prominent part under the arches here. Now there's a little bit more subtle trickery going on down below here. Now if you bring the camera just right in here, you can see that the lower suspension arm has been extended just a little bit, just to give it a little bit more camber. And because of that, they then need some slightly longer drive shafts. And then there's also a little track rod extension end anyway. And then if we come down to the rears, we've not taken the rear wheel off because there's not a huge amount to see. But essentially, they've just been shimmed out to give you a little bit more toe, just done with a couple of washers. So there's not really too much to see under the car here, but just so you're aware that it's been done. So there you have it, a little insight into what is required if you want to enter Citroen C1 racing. Now, as I said at the beginning of this video, I will be following this car and the SCC Performance team into their next race, which is a 24-hour endurance race at Silverstone. Now, I've no idea what's involved really, so I'm going to be following them and finding out what happens in the pits and that kind of stuff really. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, then feel free to hit that subscribe button and you'll be notified about the next video when it's released. And if you enjoyed this video, found it helpful, give it a thumbs up, and I'll catch you in the next one. There goes a sight from my soul.